Good afternoon. Today I'm talking about spontaneous visuo-spatial perspective taking. Let me start by showing you this picture. I would ask you to imagine facing someone like this actor sitting across a table. And as you can see here, there's a bottle on the side. And now I will ask you, where is the bottle? I think most of you would respond that is on the right, so taking an egocentric or first-person perspective, but maybe some of you may answer that is on the left, so taking an alter-centric and actor's person perspective. We can clearly say that in this case, both these answers are correct. We don't have a correct and wrong answer. And we ask ourselves, does this choice reveal something about who is answering, or just people respond in a random way? And we didn't find an answer in the literature. So we are in the domain of visuo-spatial perspective taking, which could be defined as the process of imagining how a scene looks from a point of view which could be different from one's own. And as we already see in these 2 days, it could be considered as a core component of social cognition. And usually, how is it measured? It is measured in a direct or explicit way. What does it mean? It means that we explicitly ask participants to take an ego or alter-centric perspective. And so we are measuring the ability of participants to respond in a correct or wrong way. And instead, we could consider another way of measuring perspective taking. So without an explicit request to take one of these two perspectives, so approaching a more spontaneous choice between these two perspectives. And here is our line of research, let's say. We tried to better investigate this spontaneous perspective taking throughout 4 experimental studies with more than 600 participants. And we followed 3 main aims. The first aim is to understand whether people systematically differ in their spontaneous visuo-spatial perspective taking. So how can we consider spontaneous perspective taking as an individual variable? And then, conditional to this first aim, we would like to address what individual differences in spontaneous visual perspective taking underlie, so by looking at the correlates. And as last aim, we try to better understand what condition-related factors may elicit spontaneous visuo-spatial perspective taking. And I will follow these 3 aims to show you our results. And in order to do this, we developed a new measure of spontaneous visuo-spatial perspective taking that we call it the Do You See What I See task, so the DYSWIS task. I briefly show you our task. It is a computerized task in which participants are presented with, in a randomized order, different pictures with different ambiguous for perspective questions, and we just register the self-centered or other-centered response. In different conditions that we are going to talk about in a few minutes. Confirming previous literature, we actually found that in the absence of an explicit request to take the other person perspective, generally in 40–30% of cases, we actually have alter-centric responses. But what about consistency within participants and across trials and across conditions? In all our 4 studies, we replicated consistency of responses, considering different indexes of consistency, as you can see here. And then, for example, in study 3, we also tested consistency within participants across time, with a time gap of 2 weeks, and we actually found a good to excellent test-retest reliability. So participants tend to be consistent also across time. So once we know that we can consider spontaneous visuo-spatial perspective taking as an individual variable, what about the meaning of such individual differences? So what about the correlates? We start to think about possible candidates as correlates without a baseline literature about this. Regarding the social measures, we first of all use the widely used interpersonal reactivity index questionnaire, which is a self-reported measure of dispositional empathy. And in 3 out of 4 studies, we actually found a positive relationship with our spontaneous measure, so that the greater one's self-reported empathy, the greater their tendency to take an altercentric response in our task. Continuing with the social measure, we use a classical directed explicit perspective taking task, and we found that we found a significant relationship. Here you can see a negative relationship, because in this case we use an intrusion, a bias and interference effects, so that the greater participants in self-intrusion, when explicitly asked to take another person's perspective, the lower the tendency to take another person's perspective when not explicitly asked to do so. We then investigated some non-social cognitive measures, but we didn't find any kind of relationships when considering, for example, mental rotation task, non-verbal metrics reasoning task, and classical executive function task. And so we arrived to the third aim of our studies, which is we know that participants tend to be consistent in their responses, but can we have some context-related factors which may elicit more altercentric responses? We manipulated different type of context factors. Here I can show you since it's a social cognition workshop, I choose the social factors. So we compare the spontaneous Visuo-Spatial perspective responses when presenting a social scenario compared to non-social scenarios. And what we found is indeed that what actually prompted participants to take an altercentric response was the presence of a human being compared to non-social scenarios. So we actually found the existence of a new individual variable, which is the spontaneous choice to take the other's perspective, which has been found to associate it to social measures, both dispositional traits and socio-cognitive abilities, and it has been found to be prompted by social, for example, the presence of a human context. We put this task online, available for everyone that is interested. Is now in Gorilla, but you can download the stimuli and reproduce the task, which is really simple to be built up. And here you can see the QR code. And what's next? Since we are in the developmental field, we are interested in the developmental path of such a measure. So, like looking at the age-related differences, and then in few weeks we are going to start with a new project investigating spontaneous Visuo-Spatial perspective taking, for example, in autism. And we need to wait to have more results. And since I have the possibility, vote for me. I just presented my poster. And thank you, Serena, Gabriele, and here, Floris as well, and all of you for listening.